All right, so I'm gonna record this bit. Let me know if you have any questions. I'm happy to pause at any point. I'm just gonna go to GitHub first and make sure I've got everything up to date. And then I'm gonna go over to my game project and open up the main project file. And so I'm gonna start by adding a checkpoint. And a lot of this is very similar to how many of our other components work. So the basic setup is going to be very similar to many of the other components that we've created already. The main difference is that we're going to look at a couple different ways to animate our checkpoint. And then we're also going to look at a way that we can create a signal within our code to kind of make that process a little bit more automated. So for my scene, I'm going to use, let's see, what do I have? Okay, it's not a lot going on in level 1. Okay, level 2 I have a little bit more to play with, so I'll put it in level 2. I'll just put it on the other side of this pool. And so I'll just add a checkpoint over here. And the way that this checkpoint is going to work is essentially it's just going to reset the player spawn position point. So if the player falls and hits the respawn area below the map, then the place where they'll respawn will be the checkpoint instead of the current respawn point, which is over here where the scene begins. So this is just one way of kind of conceptualizing how a checkpoint should work. It really depends on how your level is set up and how your game is set up. You might want your checkpoint to do different things. But for this example, I'm just going to create the checkpoint object and we'll just have it reset our spawn position. And so we'll be able to review a bunch of stuff that we've covered, many times already. But we'll also go over a couple new techniques that we can use. So to create my checkpoint, I'm going to make a new scene, and I'm going to use an area. So just like our collectible items and our NPC and different components in our game, we need an area to detect when the player has reached the checkpoint. So I'm going to call this checkpoint, and then I'll save it in the scenes folder, and in the components folder, I'll save it as checkpoint.tscn. And this is going to be a case where the mesh and the collider are not really going to be the same size or the same shape. It doesn't really matter that much how accurate our collider is for this. So I'm going to add a collision shape to start. And I'm just going to make this a box because it's a simple shape. And that's pretty much it. I'm not going to really change anything here. Maybe I might want to make it a little bit smaller just so it doesn't trigger too early depending on how big the visuals for this are going to be. But other than making it a little bit smaller, I don't really need to worry about it. Of course, you could also make it larger if you want it to trigger earlier on before you reach it. It's kind of up to you how you want to do that. I think actually it might be nice to make it a little bit bigger this way so we don't have to get that close to the checkpoint. Since it's not a collectible, maybe it makes sense to have it actually be a little bit larger. So I'll just set these guys to 2. Okay. So then let's add some visuals. So I'm just going to add a little mesh. You could, of course, use a model or something else here. But I'm just going to add in a mesh, and I'll put on one of my materials. And what I'm going to do is just going to add a little bit of animation to this mesh just to give it a little bit of liveliness. And so we used a little bit of the animation with our characters last week. This week we'll look a little bit about how would we create our own animation. So for the mesh, I'm going to make it like a little cone. So I'll use a cylinder mesh, and I'll just make the top radius 0 so it'll look like a cone. And then I'm going to make the height just 1 to match this a little bit. And that looks pretty good. And then I'll just throw one of my materials that I already have on here. So maybe I'll use this key material that I created. That's kind of nice because it's glowing, so that'll look good. And so what I want to do is kind of animate this so it looks like something that we want to sort of get to give it a little bit more visual interest. And then I want to be able to trigger another animation once we arrive at the checkpoint. So that's what I'm going to go over now. And we can also add a sound in as well. Of course, you can add sounds to all of the events, but that's something I think we should reinforce a little bit. And this is sort of a good thing to think about in terms of when you're structuring your level or your game overall. How often do you want checkpoints? A checkpoint can be kind of a reward. So even though it's not like you're not getting points, it's showing you that you've sort of gotten past a certain part of the game, a certain number of obstacles or a certain challenge. And so you're getting rewarded by saying, since you achieved this, this amount of progress, you don't have to redo that section, or you don't have to, try again in the beginning or go through the whole beginning of the level again. And so we want to space these out. If you have a checkpoint, every time you do one simple thing, it's not going to be a good way to reinforce the gameplay, and it's not going to be effective pacing in the game. So the game should kind of add some challenges to build tension, and then have parts where that tension is released, and a checkpoint is a good point where that can happen. You've achieved some goal, or you've beaten some challenge, and then you get a checkpoint that kind of gives you a sense of relief that you don't have to beat that challenge again. So anyway, let's animate this. So I'm gonna click on the main node and add an animation player. With the animation player, we can really animate a lot of different things. So it's a good way to automate all sorts of different stuff. It is a little tricky to use. So there's a lot of different ways to do it. I'm gonna try to go over a basic way to do it. So I'm gonna take the animation player. It opens up this little bottom animation window. And we have some controls here. So in this animation button is where you can create new animations and manage your animations. So I'm going to click on here and create a new animation, and I'll just have an idle animation. And so idle is just like the default animation that will see our checkpoint, playing before it gets triggered. So I'm going to set this to autoplay. Remember, this will turn that animation on when the scene starts. So this will be our default animation. And to animate, I just want to do a couple examples. So I'm just going to animate the position. So there's different ways to do this. You can see when I have the animation window open, all these little keys show up in these different properties. And this shows you all the different properties that you can animate in your scene. So you can just click on this key and it'll add a track into your animation. So you can really animate any of the properties in there, but you can also add tracks deliberately, which I tend to prefer. Either way is fine, but I tend to prefer adding tracks here. So if I want to animate the position, I can go to add track, and there's a few different ways that I can do this. If I add a property track, this will bring up all of my nodes, and then I can look for properties within those nodes. So if I want to animate the mesh instance, I could animate the whole thing, but animating a collision shape, while you can do it if you need to, it's going to take up more physics processing, and so we want to avoid that if we can. So I'm going to choose the mesh, and I'm just going to animate the mesh, just the visuals. So I'll go to OK, and then in here you can see all the different properties of the mesh that we can animate. There's a lot of them, so it's easier to search. So if I want to animate the position, I can just type in position and then click open. And now I can set keyframes for the position and then animate in between those keyframes. So at this point, it works very similar to any animation program that you might have used, like After Effects or Blender or Cinema 4D or whatever. If I want to get rid of this track, I just click on the delete button here. I can also add a 3D position track. So this is a little bit of a faster way just to get to that position if I just want to animate the position. That's another way to do it. You can also add a Bezier curve track. This allows you a little bit more control over the curves in the animation. So you can change those a little bit. So I'm just gonna do a property track for this example. So I'll add that back in. I'm gonna search for position. And so now I have this new animation track. And what I can do is if I select the mesh instance, you can change the position by moving it here or changing the transform over here. And when you have it where you want, you can just add a keyframe. So if I go down to my animation timeline and I right click, I can insert a keyframe here. And so that'll add one keyframe to my animation. I can zoom in a little bit. Right now the duration of the animation is just 1 second. And so then usually what I like to do, I can duplicate this keyframe. So if I move my animation timeline to here and then right click and duplicate, now I have a seamless animation, so it's going to start and end in the same position. And any keyframe that I add in the middle, it'll just add to that animation. So if I go to the very middle and I move my checkpoint cone up a little bit, and then I say insert a keyframe, now I'll have a little animation. So that's just a very, very basic animation. Of course, I can move these keyframes around and do different things. I accidentally got rid of that one. Whoops. Okay, there it is. Okay, let's try that again. So I'll just move this up like that and insert a keyframe. If you want to play back the animation without clicking on these buttons, you can hit D to play the animation, and then S stops the animation. So that'll save you a little bit of mouse time. So now I probably want to loop this, so I just click on the loop button over here, and that'll loop my animation. And then I could also make it longer if I want to. So if I want it to be a little bit slower, I could change the duration of the animation, and then I could just move my keyframes like that. And so now I've got a little bit of a slower animation, so you can kind of play around until you get the right speed and look that you want. There's also some parameters in here, like the speed scale, so we can change the overall playback speed of the animation player. And there's a bunch of other stuff in here that we can play with. But let's leave that for now. A couple other parameters that are really useful down here. There's a few basic settings. So this continuous and discrete, we want continuous here, but discrete basically means it just moves from one keyframe to the next. So that might, be a look that you want to go with if you have more keyframes. But typically you want continuous. Here you can have nearest, which does the same thing as continuous. This is just going to play just the actual keyframe. It's not going to interpolate or calculate the frames in between. Linear is just going to go straight from one keyframe to the next. And then cubic is probably going to be a nicer, more natural looking animation where it's going to have a little bit of a curve in the animation as it reaches the different keyframes. So that'll probably make it look a little bit more natural. If you want more control, you can use the Bezier track, so you'll be able to actually edit the Bezier curves. In this version, since this isn't a Bezier track, I could click the Bezier editor here, but it doesn't have any Bezier values, so we don't see anything there. Okay, so that's our idle animation. Let's add another animation, and then we'll use some code to go between them. So I'm going to save this here. Oops. I hit duplicate by mistake. So now if I want a new animation, I'm going to go to new, and let's make this our activated animation. So this will play when we arrive at our checkpoint. And this is just something to kind of demonstrate that, we've hit a different point. So I'm just going to make a little rotation. For this one, I'm not going to check autoplay because we don't want it to play at the beginning. And I'm not going to loop it because we only want it to play once. So I'm going to add a track. I'm going to go to Property and Mesh. And then I'm going to find my rotation this time. And so what I'll do is I'll just keyframe at the beginning. And then this isn't going to be a seamless looping animation. It's just going to play once. So I'm just going to go to the very end. And then I'll take my mesh instance and I'll kind of rotate it around. And then I'll just set a keyframe here. So now if I play that back, we get this little animation. I'm going to set to cubic. And so we don't get a full rotation here. So another thing that we can do is with things that are kind of difficult to visualize, like the rotation, sometimes it's easier to click on the actual keyframe. So if I click on a keyframe, that brings up the properties in the inspector over here. And then I can just set the value that I want directly in here. So I'm going to do a full 360-degree rotation. And so now we get that nice little rotation. I can even set the easing, so I can either ease into or out of the animation here with this easing curve. So I can have a little bit of a change based on the properties there. Okay, I can also set the time. I can do a bunch of different stuff there. So we have a very simple idle and very simple activated animation. We just want to switch between the two. And we also want to actually, create the functionality for a checkpoint. So we're going to make a script to handle both of those events. So let's go to our main checkpoint node, and we'll add a script here. Any questions on the animation component? There's a lot of other stuff that you can do, obviously, with the animation, like setting properties on and off. You could set, like, for example, in this animation, maybe I want it to disappear at the end. I could set a keyframe on the visibility. So there's a lot of different things that you can animate. You can also animate properties, so you can animate like variables and values in your code as well. Okay, so let's add a script here. And the script's going to be really simple. We're going to go over a new concept, which is we're going to await a signal. So that makes it easy to add a signal without actually having to connect the signal, which is kind of nice for simple things like this. So I'm going to add a new script. I'm going to make sure this is in my scripts folder. And I'm going to go with an empty template. Oops. I accidentally... Oh, no, I don't want it to be built in. Okay. So scripts/checkpoint GD is good. So the main thing that this script is going to do is it's going to change the player spawn position. So the first thing that we are going to need is a reference to what that player spawn position is. So I'm going to make an export variable for this and call it player, I guess it's respawn position. Spelled that wrong. And this is going to be a node 3D that we're going to get from whatever scene or specific checkpoint this is in, or sorry, specific scene. So then we also want to know if it's activated. If you want to be able to activate your checkpoint multiple times, you can leave this part out. But if you only want it to activate once, we need a Boolean, just like with our collected item, we need a Boolean to keep track of whether we've activated it or not. So I'm going to make a variable is activated, and we'll set that to false. And if you don't have to do this, but if you want to follow their syntax, you can say this is a Boolean, which means it can only be true or false. Okay, so now we just need to know when the player has reached the checkpoint. So here we can use our regular signal. So we can grab our node tree from our area and go to body entered. And we'll just connect that here. And we also need to remember when we do this to make sure that only the player can be detected. So we're going to go to inspector and make sure that we have our collision layers set up correctly. So these are set to the default. I'm going to go in here and add a new layer for our checkpoint and make sure this is connected to that layer and it's masking for the player. And while we're here, we should make sure the player can detect our checkpoint. So let's go to the player's collision area and add our new checkpoint. So then back in our checkpoint code, so I'm going to put an underscore here because we don't need the player body. So when we enter the checkpoint, we're going to set is activated to true so that we can't activate anymore. Or actually, first, before we do that, we have to check if we're activated. So we're going to say if not is activated. So if we're not activated yet, we can activate our checkpoint. So then we'll say is activated equals true. So this will prevent us from reusing this checkpoint. Again, you can ignore this part if you want the checkpoints to be triggered multiple times. So next, we want to do a couple things. We want to play our checkpoint animation. We want to change our player respawn point. So let's change the player respawn point first. And again, this is just one thing that your checkpoint can do. Depending on how your game is set up, you might want it to do other things. So we're going to take this player respawn position, which is in node 3D, and we're going to say dot position, and then we can just say equals position. So when we use position without anything in front, that refers to this checkpoint area 3D. So we're basically just moving the player respawn position to wherever this checkpoint happens to be. So then let's play our checkpoint animation. Yeah. So if you, it sort of depends on the order. So if I start the game, the way this is set up, so again, you can change the way this is set up. And if you want to have a specific series of events, we can talk about how to program it. But the way it's set up now, if I enter the game, the respawn position is set to like the middle of the level, like right here. And this is just obviously a demo level, so there's not really that much going on. But if I fall off the edge of this platform, I'll respawn in the same position. If I reach the checkpoint at the end of this level, and then I fall off, then I'll respawn at that checkpoint. So depending on what dying is in the game, like dying could mean different things. Like maybe you have a certain number of lives, and at a certain point, you know, you lose that checkpoint, or you lose, you know, other things that you've achieved. That's something that you'd have to program in. Okay, so let's go back to our script. So now we're going to play the animation. So I'm just going to drag the animation player into my code, and I'm going to say dot play, and I'm going to play the activated animation. And then the cool thing that we can do here is, so without using code, we could go and attach a signal to say when the animation is done, you know, go back to the idle animation. But in Godot 4, we have a new way of doing this that's very simple. We can use this await keyword, and the await keyword basically turns this script, which is running, you know, step by step, it turns it into an asynchronous script, meaning it's going to wait and other parts of the program are going to keep running, and then it's however long we decide to wait, it'll run the rest of the function when that event is done. So we're going to await the animation player. So I'm just going to drag this in here again, or you can type it. And we're going to look for a signal. So the animation player has a bunch of signals, and the one we want is animation finished. It's giving me an error. Okay, no, it's gone now. So this is basically just going to play this activated animation, and then when that animation is done, we're going to go back to the main animation. So we're going to take this line again. I'm just going to copy and paste, and I'm going to change it back to idle. So this is a lot simpler than how we used to have this set up, where we'd have like a whole other signal and a whole other function to deal with this. And we'll look at a couple other ways we can do this later as well. Let's play a sound too. So let's add in a audio player 3D, and let's just put in a random sound. I should have downloaded more or created more sounds before, but let's just use our pickup sound here. So we'll say audio stream player dot play. And so we'll play a sound, we'll play our animation, and then when the animation is done, we'll go back to idle. Because the checkpoint, unlike our collectible items, it's not going to disappear. It's still going to be there to kind of show us where our checkpoint, where we're going to return to. So I'm going to instance this into my level. So I'm going to look for my checkpoint scene. And it's in here. So I'm going to drag it up a little bit. And then let's put it on the other side of this pool. Whoops. I don't know how I did that. Okay, there we go. So if we make it to the other end of this pool, which is the great challenge of this level, we should achieve that checkpoint. The only thing we have to do here is assign the player respawn position. So we're just going to drag that into here. There's different ways to do this, but since we already have that in the scene, we can just add that there. And the respawn area will still work the same way because it's also referencing that same respawn position. Okay, so let's give that a shot. Uh-oh. Okay, I have some missing collision layers. Let's see if I have it on my pool as well. Okay, I never set the collision layers here. Let's see now. Okay, so now I can stand up. Okay, so I can still collect my apples, but let's see if we can get our checkpoint. So our checkpoint is animating, and when we approach, we should hear the sound and hear the see the other animation. Okay, and now if I jump off the side of the platform, I should respawn at the checkpoint. And so now I can still walk through the checkpoint, but since I've already activated it, it doesn't activate again. So, you could change it if you want your checkpoints to be like, to be able to be activated multiple times. But for me, I think that's good. I just want to activate it once. We can also I should probably set the blend on the animation to like 0.5 so that it doesn't just kind of jump back to the idle animation. It's kind of a slow start. Oh, maybe I'm playing the wrong, I'm playing the wrong scene. Okay. And it's still a little jumpy, but it's a little bit better. But yeah, so that's the basic idea. So we have a little checkpoint now. Again, the checkpoint can be useful. It might not be useful depending on how big your scene is or what the sort of narrative of the game is. But it can be a good reward to give a player if they've, gotten through a tense part of the game or level, to give them a checkpoint so that they feel relief that they, have made that achievement and they don't have to do it again. It can be very useful. So yeah, that's it for our checkpoint. I'll talk a little bit more about this await signal thing here, and we can also add a timer in here. We'll look at a different way to do that in the second part of class. And we'll also look at adding some particle systems. So I'll upload this script to our GitHub. Any questions or anything you guys want to look at again? Okay. So